Hey guys, this is Kirob speaking, and in today's video we are going to do a big dev update. As in, we are going to talk about what is coming in the next big milestone release, and that one is named LCV4.2, as in Light Campaign version 4.2. A much anticipated update because it includes, among many other things, as you're going to see, also the turbo revamp. And we are going to talk about all those many things. The Light Campaign version 4.1 was a massive update in of itself, just like with, what was it, 4.0, yes. Light Campaign v4.0, we had 17 patches after the initial open beta release, and yeah, come a long way since then too, and now it is more stable than ever before, I would say, as Unreal 4 versions of automation go, and of course better than it has been before. And of course, during the course of the last few updates, we have vastly improved the BeamNG exporter as well, so it is quite the blast to be driving now, and really looking forward to seeing more of that come in future as well. This is going to be a long video, and as such I'm going to spend some time and get you all those timestamps down in the description, or rather, yeah, it does do it automatically nowadays, so don't have to click it anymore, you will see it in the timeline of the video itself. Quite handy that, thanks YouTube. One thing that I need to say as a disclaimer up front is that at this stage, this is more a wish list rather than an actual list of what is going to be in that update. But I think most of these will make it in, and I have assigned a priority and a certain speed rating to every single item, where the priority is, well, how high a priority it is for that to be included in some way or form in that update, in that milestone update, and the speed is how long it takes to implement, where a 1, the worst rating, is basically a week or more of effort, and that can be significantly more than a week too, and a 10 is basically a 5-minute quick hack. For your convenience, I have here included that legend. The lists that you're going to see for each section are quite long, but I'm going to make just very quick comments about most of the items and then focus more on the very interesting points that are in there from a game design perspective, or just in general something that might be controversial or whatever. So yes, fret not when you see a massive list, most of it is going to be real quick. Please note though that I'm not going to talk about every single item on these lists, but rather only the ones marked with blue background color. And yes, the other items, if you want to know what else is being planned for implementation in 4.2, just have a quick read when the list is up and you should be good. Alright, let's start out with the campaign features in 4.2. The first one is something that is a massive project, but I think it is very important, and that is a model or facelift navigational overview map of your projects. So if you go in here, you have, let's make an observation here. That is that many players feel quite overwhelmed with the general timeline of making a new car project and putting it into production. And that is understandable, because it has many twists and turns and back and forths that are very difficult to avoid due to how many options we allow you in the setup of these projects. But it doesn't have to be that complicated if we just add a good overview method for this whole project. Because what is making this feel so awkward is, in our estimation, two things. One, the UI is quite clunky in ways. Yes, because it's also very complex, that too, and then, yeah, sure, it has design flaws too. But also, it is a massive thing you are trying to do, and you just lack overview. And we're trying to eliminate the second portion of it and partly address an issue with the first one as well, in that it is a little tedious and feels clunky. So what I'm imagining here, and what we are already prototyping as we speak, is that imagine you could hold down the tab key, and all of a sudden all your trims in that lineup, in that model lineup, in that certain facelift, are showing up as their timelines, their individual trims timelines, where you can see all the factories, or all the engineering and everything that is relevant to that facelift, all in a big kind of Gantt charty way. And that way you can interact with the different nodes that we have in there, kind of like a timeline, like these timelines down here, a bit in a similar fashion, but think of it as the whole project being there as one trim. And you can click on there anywhere and be teleported to that location instantaneously. So let's just say we are in here in our trim, and we're currently changing the drivetrain, and we are seeing that now we are going to need to go to a automatic gearbox. And now you think like, okay, I need to do that for my other cars too. So you just hold down tab. And no, I'm not going to select different things there. So you hold down tab and just click that section, the trim designer, for the other car, instead of having to back out like this. Then you go in here and you click the edit button for the other car, and you navigate back there, and then you click that one, and so on. So more direct access to the various parts, but also direct feedback on that overview map. You are supposed to see how far you have come through the process of setting up your project as a whole. And that is split up by trim, each trim in the facelift, including all the factory setup. Even if you have several factories, they're all listed there, and so on. So I think that will be a very handy tool to have, and also one that will help you see how you progress through the project as a whole. The next item here on the list is switching the forecaster to the new sales model. That might surprise a few of you campaign players, and that is, well, we have a new sales model in 4.1 which works quite well and has been fine-tuned a lot as well, and it's all great, but problem being, the forecaster is still using the old sales model, and thus is, let's say, wonky at best. And at worst, it's extremely misleading and just massively wrong. So that is a big problem, and we are going to address it by switching it over to the new sales model. Problem being there that the new sales model makes everything a lot more calculation intensive. So we are needing to find some ways of cutting down on that effort while retaining most of its accuracy. And I think because it's a forecast, it doesn't have to be entirely accurate, but wouldn't it be nice if it were at least ballpark correct? And I think we can achieve that. The next item on the list is to make fuel quality progression more interesting in campaign. Yeah, currently it's basically just a progression from leaded to unleaded. That's not very interesting. If you look at automotive history, that is not the only progression that happened, but rather also, especially in the early years, quite a sharp rise in availability of higher grade fuels. And I think that is a very interesting progression to have in the game, as it makes you really feel that something is changing and you're not going to apply the same design principles throughout, and then just at some point switch over to the equivalent fuels of the unleaded type. So that should be good. Yes, the next item is fun. The price being too low for certain demographics. If you're making a luxury car that really is quite appealing to the luxury demographic, but the luxury demographic doesn't want to drive a pleb car, then you have a problem if you sell it for pleb prices, because then all of a sudden it's a fantastic car that sells for a price that basically makes everyone be able to afford it. And what luxury buyer would descend to levels that low in his right mind? That is not acceptable. So you better go ahead and make a good car for that market and make it appropriately priced, please. Because otherwise it will be garbage. And who likes to buy garbage? On the other hand, demographics like family budget don't really care. They just want to get the best thing for the cheapest price they can. So they would be over the moon joyous, at least in this case 57 who actually can afford to buy it. One thing that will be handy is a change that we have in mind for the markets tab, and that is that you can filter by one of your trims or one of your models, or just all your lineups. And that will allow you to see what a specific trim is selling into, what markets a specific trim is selling into, instead of just seeing it for your entire company lineup. That will help you fine-tune how you address or how you approach selling to different demographics, and maybe get your spread just right, so that you don't run into larger issues with too much overlap or too little overlap. A little thing that that has a lot of consequences is that we need a better distinction between quality and tech poor. I don't quite know how that is supposed to look like just yet, but it should be easy enough to figure out, and definitely something that many have been pointing out over the years, that this is confusing. This is actually really confusing. Like, quality and tech pool, how do they interact, and do they interact at all? What is the outcome, and so on? That needs to be clarified, and probably slightly redesigned too. And the next one is a pretty big one. So we are going to change some ordering. Once again, if you have been with us for a long time, then you probably remember that at some point the engineering came before the factories, and now it's the other way around. Well, we're going to change it back, because the reasons for why that is have more or less vanished, or can be gotten rid of with a slight redesign, which will streamline the process a fair bit better. And that is moving the engineering tab in front of the factories, and also changing the layout and contents of the engineering panel. These sliders here are quite difficult to grasp unless you see this little panel up here. And basically disregard everything else on the page. Just look at this. Well, of course, there are other considerations, but everything on here is actually relevant, but mostly what you're looking for are these parameters. So what we are going to do is to have a proper table in here that is very focused on these sliders, and you see the various effects they have as you live pull them up and down, just like here, but this is the sum of all the effects. And what we want to do is the individual sliders effect broken up for each slider next to each other, and then the sum over here. So yeah, a redesign of this panel just to make it more straightforward, pointing towards the information that is actually important. And because it is in front of the factory manager then, and factory stuff in general, these panels can be redesigned too, and we don't have to have this information on that screen, but rather can have it later, where it matters more. One generally annoying thing in setting up your models or your model lineup for facelift is that there are no real synergies between the interior types. You're more or less paying the sum of these selections that you've made. For instance, if you have a standard interior trim and then a premium one, and you have a luxury one, then you're paying the engineering time for the standard, the premium, plus the luxury, and that is not great, because that means the whole project balloons out. Instead, what should be happening is that the overlap between them is considered, and that it's, as a sum, quite strongly reduced in that set that you're designing, where the highest one is most responsible for the overall time it takes. But the smaller ones are then not simplifications of the big one, so they should be quite a bit faster. The same goes for the entertainment as well. Ah yes, the next item. A display mode to show what parts are selected cumulatively across the current facelift. And that brings me back to the panel of interior and entertainment. And you probably know the toggle for the company part familiarity. And we want to have a mode which probably is on by default when you start designing your second trim for a within a model, that in campaign that is, where it lists how many of these trims, other trims, are using a certain part. So a cumulative part use. For instance, if one trim uses standard interior and you have standard selected here for this second trim, let's call it the second trim, I only have one here, but then it would show a 2 there, so that both are on the standard trim, interior trim. But if I then switch over to luxury, it would then show a 1 there and a 1 here. So just that you can keep track of what your other cars are using, so that you can maximize your synergies in engineering. And that is of course very important for various parts, like mixing various automatic transmissions with manuals, or maybe brake types, and yeah, you get it. Especially safety. Holy, safety is nasty. Alright, it is Sandbox and other features time. That is the big list, and there's so much in here that I'm not going to talk about, but loads and loads of balance and mechanics changes that are all going to be a bit under the hood, and when you then after a while play the old version, you think like, oh wow, that was very different. But hopefully it is all for the better. There are some really big items in here, big important items, and let's start with the most obvious one that you have been all waiting for. The turbo revamp is coming, and that includes all new calculations, the progressions of the turbo tech, and many more turbo options, of course, new headers, or rather a new header type, and all kinds of other things. So let's talk about that a bit. What is coming? Well, you are going to have the sequential turbos. So there will be quad turbo, for instance, for V10s and up. And you will also have parallel turbos for those systems as well. So you can make a quad turboed V12 either sequentially or as a, well, what would that be? 1 turbo per inline 3? Yeah, about right. Of course, Vs will have the option to have only 1 turbo, and what we are also going to have is variable geometry turbos, most likely also twin scroll. So yeah, that is a good set of changes there, and it will make it, will transform the game from automation, the 80s TurboTech simulator, to something that is a bit more modern as well, and a bit more high-end power as well, if you want to. Most of it is actually already done from an art point of view, and I can't show you in this version yet at the moment because well, it's not in here. I'm playing the same version that you are playing. But yes, that is mostly done. The calculations, on the other hand, are not done at all. What I've done so far is a big load of research, and I have collected loads and loads of data. And that needs to be put through the German nuclear physicist sausage machine for game mechanics, and we see what comes out the other side. One thing that I want to point out is that probably, of course, this is not going to fit on one page anymore. So that is a bit of a redesign thing then, a bigger one. How does the UI work for this kind of thing? Well, yeah, that's something we have to figure out. It's a big point of it all. Let's see what comes out of it. I'm going to continuously update you as we go along in the development towards 4.2. One thing that would make designer people's lives easier, especially also those who are playing in an environment where material costs and such nasty things like engineering time actually matter, i.e. all those players that play campaign mode. Those players will really benefit from a running total of engineering time, material costs, and production units that is shown live as you, for the first time through, design your engines, or car as well, for both of them. And that will be super handy to see as you select various items, and it's added to the totals. And probably with that would come a direct comparison to a car of the same target demographic, the average of the top for the target demographic, just to give you a bit of a better sense for where you are in the various terms of just design. One odd little thing is that all these demographics that we have here do have a singular body preference. And for some it makes sense, for others it doesn't. For instance, you could say that probably the commuter demographic is not all that worried about not getting a sedan. And previously we have had the issue of, well, if it's not a sedan, then they hate it. Well, by 10%. They hate it to 10%. And that is not a very granular approach to it. So what we're going to do is to have kind of a matrix of dependencies instead of just a singular desire for it. So if you're desiring a sedan, then if you get a hatchback, you're not really that upset. Only a certain amount of that penalty will apply. But if you get a van, then still the whole penalty applies. And that means that we can have a lot higher penalties in general, where reasonable body choices, even if you don't hit the perfect one, probably are still pretty good. And on the contrary, the really bad ones are going to be really bad. So yeah, no more luxury cars that are of wagon type or whatever they want or not want. Although sedan is quite close to a wagon anyway. Not always, but yes. So yeah, that will make the whole desires of these demographics quite a bit more fine-grained and more reasonable overall, more realistic. One thing that you have heard me talk about quite a bit in the somewhat recent little dev updates is that we do have an issue with body balance. A big issue. One that is almost game-breaking. And, oh, no, I would say it's game-breaking. And that is that bodies can be very different to the point where they become useless unless you pick the correct body. Case in point, this one versus this one. Almost the same wheelbase. The sizes are roughly the same, not quite. But this one here, the 2.8 meter wheelbase, has 726 liters of cabin volume, basically sardines that you become the sardine. And then we have this one, 1.7 cubic meters, so 1,730 liters of cabin volume for basically the same size. And of course, regarding comfort, which one do you think is superior? So what are we going to do against this to avoid this problem? Well, I think we are going to switch over to dynamically calculating those based on the actual sizes of the body mesh itself. Kind of an automated process so that neither modders nor original content creators do have to make the body boxes, assume body boxes inside these bodies to make these volumes, because everyone would do them slightly differently and it all becomes a giant mess. So we are going to move away from that giant mess and dump it in the garbage, as you know. And yes, from there we are going to probably also try to do the same for weight, as well as, well, cargo volume is one of those, cargo boxes, passenger boxes, as well as drag potentially. That would have to be year dependent as well, but there are also cheaty bodies. Not necessarily in the vanilla set, but yeah, you know what that allows us to do? Well, it allows us easily to allow you to use mods and whatever in campaign settings or even in multiplayer settings, and we know they would be balanced because they're all following the same rules. So I think that will be a massive change that will reveal how broken the game was before. Even more than this situation here already does. Oh yes, the next one is a massive can of worms, and one that is very close to my heart. In that let me describe the situation. So we have made a game which has loads of stats that in turn have massive amounts of dependencies, as you clearly can see here, just drivability, like all these things, and probably a few that we actually missed. And yes, this is all making up that stat. And then what do you really care about? Like, do you care about any of these? Nah, not really, because the only thing that matters is competitiveness. So basically, we have boiled down all this beautiful stat design, where there's loads of intricate and nuanced decisions to make. We have boiled down to a singular, boring-ass stat, which is called competitiveness. Yes. So is that a good design decision? I would argue no, it is not. So how do we get away from this? Well, there is one thing that we could do. Or there are several things we can do. And one of them is that we don't show the competitiveness number directly anymore, because it's also no longer relevant with the new sales model. The competitiveness number was devised as an easy way to gauge how good a car is for the old sales model that we have gotten rid of. For the new sales model, the competitiveness number is a somewhat decent indicator at best, and at worst it is vastly misleading and completely the opposite of what it should be. So not very helpful. But what is cool, and what the game really excels at the moment, or has for a longer time, is all these stats and how they come to be. How you increase and decrease them, and how many interesting choices there are along the way. And yes, all that just goes away because you're only looking at this one number. And you choose whatever puts up that number. And that's super boring gameplay. So what we are going to do is make you focus on the stats themselves in a reasonable way that is not overburdening either, while still having a bit more context for these demographics, because you're still designing for a certain demographic. For instance, what could be done is that you see these demographic desires there towards the right, or right now in the middle of the screen. And what could be done is that according to these desires, certain stats are telling you how well they are balanced for that demographic. Higher is always better, of course, but how well is your car balanced for that demographic? This demographic, for instance, has 0 sportiness requirement. How much of your score, of your desirability score, is coming from your sportiness value? Well, that would be a big fat 0 for this one. Unless you are in Farenia, where everyone cares about sportiness. But I think you are getting a bit of a gist of this whole thing. So we want it to be more desire and stat based, rather than everything feeds into a single number and then you just increase it and that's the game. So that is a massive rethink of the underlying game design and how we steer the user experience. So that's a big change. Not necessarily from an implementation point of view, because it's very easy to remove this number and to do something else with the UI. Maybe it's just a few days of work. But from a gameplay point of view, this will be massive. One thing that we have observed over the last couple of years is how much the game has grown in size and also in community provided content. So one of those problems leads to a massive install size, which is a little uncomfortable. One of the biggest contributors to size is photo scenes. So what we are planning to do for 4.2 is that we are going to split out photo scenes into their separate UI, which is not like this, but rather a nicely thumbnailed UI there where you can see all the scenes, but they're not being shipped with the game. Rather, we have them be, apart from like very lightweight ones like Black Mirror. There's not much art assets in this one. So this one is lightweight, this one can stay in the base game. But all the others are becoming workshop items, and so as such official mods, where from the game you can subscribe to certain photo scenes and have them download in the background already for your next session. So that way we are dramatically cutting down on the install size and at the same time being able to present what the community has created as well, because that could work similarly for community content, especially for design rooms and photo scenes. That is the main focus of this, because they are massive in size, or can be massive in size. Like the London photo scene, I think it's like 4.5 gigabytes or something ridiculous like that. That would be Old Street in here. I mean, yeah, it's really cool, but if you don't have 5 extra gigs on your hard drive, then or a really slow internet connection and you want to install the latest version of the game, well, yeah, that's not so cool anymore. Anyway, I think that will be a good change. Another interesting one. We are going to switch around a few items in here for what is considered the engine family versus what is considered the engine variant. We are going to move VVL over to the engine variant, and instead of VVL here have a quality slider, so that when you are designing the original base engine, the family for these engines that you are making, then you can already put in a certain amount of quality. And that means that as you are facelifting the engine and producing new versions of it in the future, you will always have with you the effects of your initial family quality setting. And that will make making engines separate from your car projects even more appealing. Because at that point you can then decide to have a longer first engineering time and get a bit of quality. If you want to use that engine for a long time, you can invest a little in it, a little bit more than you would otherwise. And that would come with reliability and cooling and weight effects and service costs and smoothness and all that good stuff that you would expect from a quality of the engine family block and head overall, as well as valve train and so on. So I think that will be a really nice change. The next feature on the list is that we are going to get new intake options. Instead of standard performance and race, there will be a wider range of different optimizations, and they will come with their own resonance ranges. So you will have, for instance, a compact version which will lower the overall size of your engine, as in liters, if you have your engine bay quite full. So that will lower, for instance, servicing costs. But in general, it provides very, very little benefit in terms of resonances and so on. And then, of course, you have the various rev ranges that can be targeted with various intakes, and they do take different amounts of space, as well as have different artworks and so on. And we are aiming for also not only having a few different options, like 5 normal ones or 6 even, and then also a variable length intake, that too. So that will be quite nicely fleshed out after this update. And we're going to stay on this page for the next item, and that is a bit of a revamp too. Both compression and its progression, but also the fuel mixture. And as you probably know if you're a proper car nut, these ratings that we have here, that is just not how it works. The engine is not set to a certain rich mixture, but usually it varies across a range. It's more or less a 2D map. No, we're not going to implement a 2D map because that would be terrible for gameplay. It would be really fun to do once. And yes, team members of our development team have done it themselves on real cars, and it is tedious as fuck. So no, we're not going to do it in automation. But what we are going to do is, instead of going, and this might be controversial, but hear me out, we are making this slider into a 0 to 100. So abstracting it, because this rating doesn't mean anything. It is, like in modern systems, this is just not how it works at all. So it's giving a completely misleading picture of how the engine works. What we instead are going to do is, within the range of allowed mixtures for the fuel system, how much do you want to prefer to tune it towards the rich side or the lean side in various situations. This is what this slider is going to become. What we are also going to show at the same time in the tooltip is that we still keep those numbers around there, that we have a maximum AFR, but also we add a lean cruise AFR. And that will be a lot more realistic overall than what we have here, which is partly applicable to old style carburetor tuning, but not even that really. So yes, this is going to become more abstracted, but at the same time more realistic. One topic that is returning very often throughout the course of automation's history in its design and just board activity, forum board activity, is gearboxes and the balance between automatics and manuals. Yes, the automation player on average is more of a car nut than the average population, and that's no surprise. And that's also not surprising that thusly automation players tend to prefer driving manuals over automatics, even though that is not the case for the general population. So in general, automation players tend to think that manuals are very much underpowered and automatics are very much overpowered. And there is some truth to that in the balance, and we are going to address that, but we are going to make it overall more realistic. And that will include more accurate power loss simulation from the automatics, and also rechecking all the balance. For example, the drivability being penalized by the manuals is one of the biggest issues for its usability or viability to put into cars. And it shouldn't be that much of a drivability issue, it's more of a comfort issue for the driver. So we are going to take another look at that and probably change it much closer to how you would like to see it, and make manual gearboxes a viable option even in modern times. Another change in the fuel system tab is one that you will like to see. You will like to see it a lot, because this is going to allow you to make tune engines for 110 RON, 110 octane, if you like that. You can't sell the car then, but because that fuel doesn't exist to buy anyway, basically. Well, not in the automation world, that is. But we are going to change this system of fuel type selection. There will be a selection for leaded or unleaded, and then a selection of fuel octane that you are trying to optimize your engine for. And then you are selecting also a fuel type that the car is advertised at. So you wonder why the two? Well, why don't you always do you tune for 91 and then you advertise it as 91? Well, or the equivalent that you've chosen might be 98. Well, the simple reason is that octane is not octane. And depending on the atmospheric conditions and so on, you will, and temperature, that's a main factor, you will not have the same performance out of, or the same effective octane rating out of fuels. So if you're getting a little too close to that limit, to the margin, then cars will tend to start knocking here and there if they don't have modern fuel systems that automatically correct for it. So there is a lot more fidelity to gain out of, and nuance to gain from this system, from this new system, once we move away from a strict, well, the car will always run on its designated fuel type. So this will be quite interesting to see how it plays out. And then we have something that many of you have been waiting for, and yeah, it probably won't fit on here, but we shall see where to put it. Weight distribution slider. Yes, you can, in the design of your car, within reason, adjust the weight distribution of the car. And that is usually achieved by moving the engine position, but also just taking chassis weight or ancillaries and put them somewhere else. like the battery in the back or whatever, right? And that is going to be simulated, and we just need to find a good place for that slider to be. But yes, that will be quite handy for all of those of you who like to have that option. And of course it will be offset by... it will have a center point, which is the kind of the sweet spot for the design, which is what you currently would see. And then from there, it for increasing or decreasing the slider, that will cost engineering time. So you can invest engineering time and other resources that way to optimize the weight balance of your car. Brakes have never really worked the way we really intended. They are fine, but they don't feel like you have proper control over them still, despite us implementing the brake bias since a few years back. That has helped the issue quite a bit, but it's still partially unrealistic in that one piston brakes can't really brake the car enough in many situations, even though that's not really a thing that happens in real life. So yeah, what we are going to change this to is a much reduced size for these fields, which gives us space to have individual brake strength sliders for front and back. So we get rid of the brake bias slider, and we get rid of, or we reduce the size of these option lists, and then we have space to have a force slider, basically impact each side of the car, front and rear individually. So you have your brake bias basically baked into a force slider, and that is one for the front, one for the rear. That will then incur servicing costs and like just how long the brakes are lasting. If you're applying way too much pressure on a too small brake, yeah, then you will get issues. But also it will allow you to have smaller disc rotors and then still apply a huge force on them and get the brake performance, but of course that will yield a lot of brake fade. So there will be a lot more options to play with and to optimize, and I think the whole system will just fall into place nicely that way. Well, then we have an interesting one. I have not delved deep into myself just yet. Andrew has done some research on it, and that is revamping the all-wheel drive mechanics in the game. And that will boil down to the differentials actually mattering for all-wheel drive systems in particular, because of the allowed torque splits they come with. And that will also have consequences throughout all the different drive types that we have. Apart from the pure ones, that is, they are kind of remaining. But yes, this will make all-wheel drive systems a lot more nuanced and will make more sense that you can't really go with a rear engine, make it all-wheel drive, and then pull the the power distribution slide all the way to the front. That is not something that works. So yeah, that will become a lot more realistic and interesting as well. And the last item to talk about in the Sandbox list is that we want to have a kind of car brochure style difference comparison between engines and cars, or for engines and cars, in the project UI. So basically have an option to compare several trims when you're making a car project, which has several trims. All the trims would be listed, and you would see the as the columns the various parts that have been chosen, and on the y-axis, so to say, you have those different types. For instance, gearbox. Well, there's an advanced automatic 4, and the other one has chosen a manual 5, and so on. So yeah, I think you've seen those kind of comparison tables. That is something that we are working on. So a nice illustration and overview of what car and car lineup you're making within your model. And last but not least, of course, the art changes that are going to come for 4.2. We are in a very good and nice, interesting spot there, because it is not such that the art side is working all out in order to complete the what is on the table for 4.2, and Rather, it is quite fortunate that, well, they probably are going to finish off what is being required and then have time left over to do cool shit. And cool shit usually ends up being very much appreciated by the community. But yes, the core parts of the art features that are coming, of course, are the turbo revamp stuff. So lots of more turbo graphics for the various options that you have. And then the next big item would be the massive item for at least campaign players, I guess, and also lore nerds, is that we are going to implement the Camshaft Software Game World map for the light campaign, and that is of course the shared universe with the Cyclist Tactics. That is our new side project game. Demo is available and you should check it out. But yeah, that will be a massive improvement to the fidelity of the game world that the game is set in, at least the light campaign. Something that has been going on for a longer while is the suspension and chassis rework, and that is going to continue. And there's still quite a bit to do in there. And yes, we first will stop once that is all considered done. There are still a lot of models in there which are, let's call them subpar. Even though subpar is a really stupid term if you're playing golf, because subpar is better than par. So anyway, that's a side note. Okay, cool. What more? The last nice thing that is coming is that we have a few photo scenes that are work in progress or on hold at the moment, and we will most likely have the time to put a few of them in, or rather not in, and have them downloadable via our new UI that we talked about before. That will be quite nice. Photo scenes, especially the ones that we have made in recent times, have been quite stunning indeed. So, I think that should wrap us up. So indeed, this was the Big Little Dev update, and I hope you enjoyed the contents of this one. There's a lot to discuss, of course, in the comments below and our forums or on the Discord. Looking forward to that. And also, of course, what you would like to know is, how long is this going to take? And the answer is, we don't quite know. That's a lot of stuff, but a lot of good stuff. And most of these aren't quite as big changes as they might seem. They are big changes for gameplay, but not really on the implementation side. They're quite heavy on the design side, though. And yes, there are, of course, exceptions. All those things marked with a 1 in speed, they are quite big. Yes, I am going to keep you updated over the course of the next weeks and months as parts or items of these lists are being implemented and can be showcased. That will be good fun, and I hope you enjoyed, and see you guys next time.